In this video, we are going to talk about the Vice President and presidential succession. Main objectives include the following. What are the duties of the Vice President? And what happens when the President is unable to perform the duties of office? Our quote for this video comes from Dan Quayle. He was the Vice President under George H.W. Bush from 1989 to 1993. And he said in one word sums up probably the responsibility of any Vice President, and that one word is to be prepared. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree with Dan Quayle? Let's look at the facts. Vice President is also a part of the President's administration. This position is unique in that it is the only other elected position in a President's administration. Constitution assigns the office of the Vice President several major duties. First and foremost, they preside over the Senate. Second, they open and count the electoral votes in presidential elections. And they serve as President if the President cannot do the job. In the 1800s, the Vice President's role did not amount to much more than carrying out the duties outlined. They generally did not attend cabinet meetings or help make policy. The very first Vice President, John Adams, did not even run for office with George Washington. Adams came in second in the presidential election and was thus made Vice President. In 1804, however, Congress passed the 12th Amendment, requiring separate ballots for President and the Vice President. Besides assuming the presidency in the event of a vacancy, the main role of the VP in the past was to help elect the president. A vice presidential candidate can help balance the ticket. That means bring in votes from a certain political group or particular geographic area that the presidential candidate cannot get on his or her own. The Constitution did not originally have a way to fill the office of president if it became vacant. It stated only that the powers and duties of the president were to be transferred to the vice president, not the office itself. In 1841, President William Henry Harrison died, and Vice President John Tyler succeeded him as president. This became the practice for filling a presidential vacancy. This practice became part of the Constitution when the 25th Amendment was adopted in 1967. It said that the Vice President would become president if the president died, resigned, or was removed from office. Before 1967 and the passage of the 25th Amendment, no guidelines existed in the Constitution for deciding what to do when a president was disabled. The 25th Amendment filled the gap in the Constitution. It says that the VP will become acting president if the president informs Congress that he or she cannot carry out the duties of the office. Or the vice president and the majority of members of the cabinet can inform Congress that the president is disabled. The president decides when to go back to the duties and informs Congress. The vice president and a majority of the cabinet may challenge this decision. In that case, Congress has 21 days to decide the matter. Even though the main job of the vice president is take over for the president, this position has been vacant 18 times, 9 by secession, 2 by resignation, and 7 by death. In the event of a vacancy for the vice presidency, the 25th Amendment allows the president to nominate a new vice president, who shall take office upon confirmation from the Senate and a House majority vote. This occurred for the first time when Nixon appointed Ford. Presidential succession is the plan to fill a vacancy in the presidency. If the president dies, resigns, or is impeached and convicted, the vice president becomes president. The Presidential Succession Act of 1947 set the order of the succession following the vice president. The U.S. presidential line of succession is the order in which persons may become or act as president of the U.S. if the president becomes incapacitated, dies, resigns, or is removed from office. The succession follows the order of Vice President, Speaker of the House, President pro tempore of the Senate, and then the heads of the federal executive departments who form the Cabinet of the United States. While the Vice President's only constitutionally prescribed role, aside from presidential succession, relates to the role as President of the Senate, the role of the VP evolved during the 20th century into more of an executive branch position. Currently, the vice president is usually seen as an integral part of a president's administration. Since the 1970s, presidents have begun to rely more heavily on their VPs to help make policy and carry out their programs. Jimmy Carter's vice president, Walter Mondale, established a tradition of weekly lunch meetings with the president. Some recent vice presidents have also been given specific assignments. Bill Clinton charged Vice President Al Gore with a project to reform the organization of the executive branch. Similarly, President George W. Bush relied heavily on his vice president, Dick Cheney, who took an extremely active role in assisting the president with foreign policy and energy programs. Joe Biden, Barack Obama's vice president, brought years of foreign policy experience to his office. Even though the vice president might not have many constitutional roles and assignments, nonetheless, the vice president brings character and charisma to the office of the presidency, as well as lighthearted memes and bromance. To help them carry out their duties, vice presidents today have their own staffs. Additionally, the vice president's office is in close proximity to the Oval Office in the West Wing, which allows for more interaction between the two offices. I also think the vice president has not been given as much power as the president, in part because the president cannot remove the vice president. He can't fire him. So now that we've learned something about the vice president, I have a few things to answer. Do you think the 12th or the 25th Amendment was a good idea? Is the VP not given enough responsibility or roles? How has the vice president changed in the past 30 years? Do you think the line of succession is fairly organized? And do you agree or disagree with Dan Quayle's quote, "One word sums up probably the responsibility of any VP, and that one word is to be prepared. Why or why not?"